This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. It feels like I just had them on to preview the Steelers season, but hey, the Browns played 2 division games to start the year, 3 in 4 weeks. Kind of a crazy run for this team before the bye week in week 5. And we're here to preview this game, get a Steelers perspective on it. My guy, Derek, how you been, man?
Chilling, man. Yeah, wasn't too long ago since I was on here, so glad to be making my second appearance. But yeah, definitely both our teams that we're covering had vastly different week 1 experiences for sure.
Yeah. Let's talk about that experience for Pittsburgh versus San Francisco. Now, I feel like a lot of people focus on the offensive miscues of the Pittsburgh Steelers. For me, I was never really like 100% sold on Kenny Pickett. So I wasn't that surprised that the offense kind of looked like what the offense has kind of been, right? That was very similar to that Philadelphia game last year. The defense, on the other hand, looked a little bit more porous than I would have expected for them. Now, I know Christian McCaffrey's numbers are a little inflated because he had the 2 big runs in that game, especially the 1 big touchdown run. But I think the Ayuk numbers are the ones that really jump off the page, where you're like 130 is a little bit insane there for Brandon Ayuk. When you watch that game, you know, somebody who really covers this, gets into the nitty-gritty, what concerned you the most about what you saw on Sunday from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, defensively, I mean, they just got absolutely boat raced from the first snap. I mean, it was a disappointing performance. It was ugly. And like you said, expectations for the defense are admittedly higher. You know, anyone who's followed the team knows that the offense has struggled. You know, preseason's preseason. You know, we were optimistic that, you know, some of that momentum could potentially carry over. But this was very much going to be a team that, you know, is going to be carried kind of by the defensive performance week in and week out. And, you know, coming into the game, one of the things that you know, I've said all week was, you know, the Steelers, they like to play a lot of man coverage, especially on third downs. They got a lot of new pieces in the secondary. You know, bringing in Patrick Peterson, Chandon Sullivan, Keanu Neal starting a strong safety. And then even, you know, the linebacker core, which they completely overhauled. And San Francisco just tore them apart, especially over the middle of the field. They had no answer for Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk's one of the best route runners and man beaters really in the NFL. He was towards the top 10 in like yards per target against man coverage last year. So the Steelers don't really have a cornerback on the roster right now that's really suited for a matchup like that. And then just, I would say, like, the general feel of, you know, the passing game was just, they had a lot of communication errors, you know, just checks, empty checks, bunch checks, just guys not being on the same page. And you mentioned McCaffrey, man. McCaffrey was going to get his. Tomlin talked about that was stopping him was the number 1 priority. Can't allow explosive plays, especially explosive plays in the run game. And, you know, him ripping off that run was one thing, but I thought McCaffrey was really special all day in terms of vision. It wasn't as much what the Steelers didn't do in the run game, but more so of just like how incredible San Fran's like blocking up front was, and combine that with McCaffrey's vision. Those are things that really stood out on film.
Yeah, with Minkah, it seems like every year at the beginning of the season, they do something that they know they're going to change with him. Like, and they did it again, where like they always kind of play him weird at the beginning. You wonder, where's Minkah? And then by like week 8, they're like, oh, we'll just do what we did, you know, when he was almost defensive player of the year, and put him back there. What is going on with that? Like, is that like to fix a problem that's going on with the defense? Is why they keep moving Minkah around like that?
Yeah. So the slot corner position has been something that, you know, we've talked about a lot this offseason. You know, they brought in Chandon Sullivan. They had Elijah Riley, losing Cam Sutton to the Detroit Lions was a little bit of a surprise. He was a guy that I think a lot of people expected to be back. And what Sutton did was like he was kind of this amoeba piece in the secondary that allowed them to do so many different things because he can play outside, but he can also play in the slot. So whenever they get into these passing situations, nickel dime, they could just kick him inside, especially if you're going against a team with a good slot receiver. And they don't have that luxury anymore. So, there was some rumors that, you'd see Patrick Peterson in the slot a little bit. So we saw that briefly in the dime against the Niners. But, they used Minkah in there as well. I think he played, 13, 14 snaps in the slot against the Niners. They were blitzing him a decent amount. He blitzed 4 times, which is the most since, his first appearance as a Steeler back in 2019. It's just, I do think it's more of them trying to just work out some problems and like see what they can potentially do. They recently acquired Desmond King, but King wasn't active on Sunday, potentially because he hasn't had enough time with the defense to really get fully acclimated to the play calls, the scheme, and such. So it's gonna be interesting to see if that continues. My guess is that it won't. I think that they'll probably use King there, if not this week, maybe next week. But I think they're going to reduce and kind of turn that dial down a little bit as we move forward, just because it's a smart thing to do.
Let's move the focus to week 1 here, or week 2 here. You play against the Browns. Browns had the opposite week 1 experience, right? Really good week 1. Shut down Joe Burrow to 82 yards. Those 3 receivers in Cincinnati to under 50 yards total, all 3 of them combined. And they're coming in this week feeling pretty good about themselves. How do you like? I know the Browns have had a tough history in that stadium in Pittsburgh, right? But how do you feel about the matchup going up against this Browns defense after the week 1 performance the Steelers had, given how well that those corners especially played, and there's no Deontay Johnson?
Yeah. No, it's terrifying. I mean, I really thought that I was kind of peeking a little bit at my laptop. So I got like 3 screens downstairs in my basement. I was kind of peeking at my laptop and I just kept like looking over and I'm like, Cincinnati's not scoring, man. Cincinnati's not scoring. And I immediately, as soon as I got the tape, I had to really comb through at least the defensive version just to see what it was. Kind of looked at some numbers. We talked about, I think, in the preview about what I was excited about with the Browns defense is just adding Jim Schwartz to the fold, see what he was going to be able to do, what wrinkles were going to be there. I thought that the Myles Garrett wrinkle of putting him over the A gap, allowing him to play kind of like a mugged up inside linebacker role was particularly interesting. I think they used that like 4 or 5 different times. They got a sack out of it, and I think 3 incompletions. And then I thought the other thing that Mike Tomlin also in his presser with the media this week admitted was I thought that the cornerbacks really won the Browns the game. Cleveland blitzed a ton, but if you're going to blitz and dedicate more rushes to the passer, you got to be really comfortable in your folks in the back end. I thought that Newsome, Emerson, Denzel Ward, the fact that they were able to go man to man, play a lot of middle field closed coverage on those Bengals receivers, which I think you and I would both probably agree is arguably the best receiver core in the league. That showed a lot of confidence. It really that was a statement kind of performance by that unit that things could potentially be changing this season.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting because like they play the Steelers and then they play Tennessee 2 weeks back to back, and I imagine it's gonna be pretty similar, right? Where you're gonna want your corners to live on the island, and then just close that middle field portion because we know where Kenny struggled at in the NFL so far. What do you think Kenny has to improve upon in order for the Steelers to have a chance of winning this week against this Browns defense?
Yeah, so I haven't really been able to comb through like every single thing. I'm a little bit. The things I'm worried about is just the pass rush, right? Because you look at the games that Miles had, and Miles is always going to be a guy that's probably going to get his. But the Steelers in the past, the way they've dealt with Miles, and like he's had some good games, some quiet games, but the way they've dealt with him is just consistently putting the tight end to his side and say like, all right, you're going to rush twice, we're going to chip you all day long, and just make it really difficult on you. Well, they moved him around a little bit. You got Zadarius Smith, who I think, one of the best spinners in football. He's consistently been good when you move him to the inside. Having all these flexible pieces up front and Schwartz's aggressiveness, showing the willingness to blitz. I mean, I think they blitzed more or at a higher rate than every NFL team last week except one. So just and these were quick pressures. These weren't, Burrow was holding the ball
Mm-hmm.
for 3 seconds and before somebody was getting in his face. Like these were quick 2 second pressures that were getting there. So that's particularly struggling because really when you look at Kenny's performance last week against the Niners, he was never comfortable. I mean, it was really from the jump. It wasn't that pressure made him uncomfortable over the course of the game. His footwork was poor. His eyes were everywhere. He just looked really erratic and jumpy in the pocket. And I think that if that continues Monday night, um, this is not going to be a game that's going to go the way that Pittsburgh's envisioned it going.
Yeah, and I've heard this before, but everybody was kind of like talking about the preseason, so it was kind of like shelved. But I don't think enough people accounted for like how rough the beginning of the schedule is for Kenny Pickett when it comes to like some of the defensive coordinators he's playing. Like even, well, I think the Texans on the schedule, that's still D'Amico Ryans, right? Like it's still a really good defensive mind there. Yeah. And it's still a Derek Stingley is over there. They have some good corners. They have a Will Anderson look good in that first game too against Baltimore, against Ronnie Stanley at times too. So it's like, he's a second-year quarterback, and I remember being into this weird bind with Baker Mayfield where it's like, how much slack do you give him before you just say, hey, he can't overcome some of these circumstances. It is what it is with him. We probably need to upgrade. Like, where are you at with like the slack that you're giving Kenny? Like if let's say he struggles this week, he struggles the week after, is it, hey, he's a young quarterback playing against some tough situations? Or is it, hey, he's a young quarterback who's not able to rise to the occasion?
Yeah, I think it's always tough because I think, ideally you'd want to give young quarterbacks, 2 years, 3 years, maybe if a guy comes into just a brutal situation. But the NFL's gotten a lot less patient with those guys too, just because there's a lot of pressure on everybody to win, right? And the thing that makes Kenny's kind of discourse a little bit different too is he was a 24-year-old rookie, so he's already 25
Mm-hmm.
years old, and he's not. You look at some of these guys that come out and they're 21-year-old rookies. Well, you expect the development track to be a little bit longer with those guys, and I think that Kenny was probably unfairly, you know labeled as this pro ready guy when that's not the type of prospect he was. He was still working through a lot of the same stuff that younger guys do. And I think that you want to have patience, but to also, I think you just need to see, development's not linear, but you need to see him take steps forward. And obviously last week wasn't the step forward that, everybody was really looking for, but you need to start seeing some steps, some gradual growth. He's going to be the guy for the rest of the year, in my opinion, no matter what happens. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a worst case scenario where you get to let's just say like after the bye week or week 10 or something like that, and he's still looking like the guy that we saw for the majority of his rookie season. The offense is terrible, they're not moving the ball, where you at least have to start entertaining the possibility, depending on what the record for the Steelers is, that they could potentially move on. But I think that discussion really doesn't probably start until at least like midway through the season.
Yeah, and that pro ready tag, I feel like it's one of the most unfair tags to ever give to a prospect because we don't actually know what pro ready means when it comes to these prospects. Because you look at the guys who've been ready early, it's been the guys who've been labeled projects recently, right? It's like, oh, Lamar Jackson has the best rookie year in that 2018 class. Justin Herbert looks great almost immediately in that 2020 class. Even Kyler Murray looked better a lot faster than people would have expected. And then you even fast forward to this year's class, Anthony Richardson looked like the best quarterback out of that rookie class. And that was the one people swore could not play early on. And I think sometimes we say guys are pro ready because their game feels familiar to things that we've seen in the pros, not necessarily because they have these traits that can just carry over to pro ready football, because it's like sometimes pro ready is just, hey, Anthony Richardson can run faster than everybody and nobody can tackle him. And that's just going to give him time to figure out everything else. And he has amazing arm strength, right? Like that's kind of what puts you there. Tua is another interesting one where like it finally looks like he's putting it together now. he was the pro ready guy in that 2020 class, right? Where people were like, oh, his game immediately translates, but he had to figure it out. It took him 3-4 years to get there. And people gave up on him along the way, partly because he was the pro ready guy, where Josh Allen got like 3 years to get all those things out, and he was labeled as the project. So it's like, maybe we should just stop labeling quarterbacks pro ready, because that's, unless you're Andrew Luck, like that's the only guy I've ever seen like that's pro ready, stepped in day one and just truly be pro ready. And
I think too, you mentioned the running ability. You know, a lot of these guys that get that tag of, you know, oh, it's going to be a little bit, you know, a lot of people kind of tabbed, in my opinion, a little bit unfairly, Anthony Richardson as a guy that was a year away from being a year away, right? But you can, like, the way offensive coordinators now, you know, at least the good ones, you know, the non-Matt Canada offensive coordinators are at least molding their offenses around their quarterback skill set. And, you know, you saw Indy, you know, I've caught just a glimpse of what Richardson's day looked like, but it's a lot of half-field reads. You know, they're leaning into the quarterback run game. You mentioned, you know, just the flamethrower of an arm. Those things are things that you can at least build an offense around. And I think that the tools, in particular, the guys that can run and use their legs, at least it gives you, I think a lot of times that used to be thought of as like, oh, that's the ceiling, like, oh, that's the ceiling. But I actually think that sometimes the tools, the running ability, it gives you a good floor, because like if nothing else is working, you know, those guys are struggling with their arms. You can say, all right, well, we're gonna run GT counter, or we're gonna run, you know, some quarterback draw, some quarterback power, just to get us in some favorable, you know, second, third downs. You know, and I think that those are interesting conversations. But I think we also got to admit, like, does anyone really know how to scout quarterbacks? Like, we can all feel confident about it, but like the NFL doesn't know how to scout quarterbacks, so it's really just a complete crapshoot, man. To be honest with you,
people swear that Pat Mahomes needed that year. I'm not convinced, because like he threw 50 in his first full year. I'm like, I think he would have been good. I feel like the Chiefs might have cost themselves a championship not playing him immediately, right? And when it comes to Anthony Richardson, I remember saying this in the pre-draft process. People were so like determined to act like, oh, you can't play him for a year or two. And I was like, he's the one player in this draft class that, hey, if it doesn't go well, you can still do something with him, because he's still 6'5", 240 and runs 4.3. Like you can find a way for that guy to be productive on the football field. Everybody else, like if Bryce Young's not good at throwing the ball, like what you gonna do? Like he's small, he's not that fast. You know, there's not much you can do there. And I think Bryce is going to be fine. I think CJ is going to be fine. But it's just that sometimes people get so caught up in the college tape and what they feel like it should look like, and they don't really see what it can look like. And Anthony Richardson was a great example of that. And like his processing stuff wasn't bad in college. He just didn't have great technique when it comes to throwing the football. But back to the Steelers and Browns, as we got away talking about rookie quarterbacks for a little bit. No Cam Hayward. And I've always said Cam Hayward might be one of the most underrated players in the NFL. Because when you talk about the TJ Watt thing, right, we're in the habit of saying, hey, his anchor is the guy that's opposite of him at the other edge rush position. You know, is it, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. He played for Kentucky. You got Bud Dupree. Bud Dupree, is it Alex Highsmith? And it's like, no, the guy that's been the biggest helpful piece for TJ Watt has always been Cam Hayward. Like that's been his role. Having a guy who can get double-digit sacks from the interior in that defense changes a lot about what you can do to mitigate the damage from TJ Watt. Him not being there, but TJ Watt going up against a rookie. I am actually more concerned about the left side. Alex Highsmith versus Jed Wills. Jed gets beat inside easily. Sometimes Jed just gets too much depth on his drops. He's like parallel with the quarterback. Highsmith is bendy. Like Highsmith can get under you. I think that's a terrible matchup. When I look at TJ Watt, DeJuan Jones, I think the sheer size of DeJuan might just help him out, because TJ likes to just run through your torso, right? And he's very good at that. But the one thing DeJuan we know he can do well is anchor. So he might be all right on that side. Not saying he's going to shut down TJ, but he might not be a disaster on that front. That on the other side, I look at that Jed Wills thing, I'm like, man, Alex Highsmith does everything the Jet sucks at. And he might be on the island. because they're going to roll everything towards TJ because of the rookie.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting thing. You mentioned Dewan, getting his first start. That's a difficult task. In your first NFL, starting appearance. But Dewan's at least got the length. That he can kind of run TJ up the arc a little bit. I think that if I had to guess, that Dewan will probably be okay against TJ, but I think that his losses are probably going to look pretty bad. Like it would surprise
Mm-hmm.
me if TJ like didn't have a sack on Monday night, barring
He'll get caught with
the
like
yeah,
sitting and
barring
punching. Yeah.
yeah,
Like,
barring, Cleveland just dedicating a tight end or a back like every single play and just, consistently sliding the protection, which they may do. But you mentioned the Highsmith thing. Highsmith had a couple sacks last year on Jed Wills, and I think both of those matchups. And really what Highsmith wants to do is not extremely different from TJ, but it's just, those guys are speed rushers. And the fact that, Highsmith, he has a good get off. He's going to go, speed rip and ghost move to the outside. And then he has that inside spin counter. And what he's going to do is like he'll threaten your outside shoulder. And then, like, second quarter, third quarter on a passing down, they'll get into a situation where he's got that inside track and he hits you with the spin move. So as soon as he sees Will's shoulder start turning to the sideline, he's going to get one. So I expect Highsmith to have a good game. I know Wills is not the most likable, or not likable is probably not the right word, but I know he's oftentimes the guy that Browns fans are most frustrated with.
he
So
is. You know how you have players on the team where they're good enough to be controversial because they
yeah,
have to be out there. Like it's not
yeah,
like they can be out there. They just like I feel like Devin Bush was like this for a little while before he completely just tapered off at the end of his Steeler run, where it's like, yeah, I know, but he's got to be out there because he's so much better than what you thought Spillane was or something like that,
yeah,
right? And so it's like, what are we gonna do here, right? And I think that's with Jed. It's like, yeah, he's not great. He's all right, but the thing is like the replacement options for him. You don't have first round picks, and then if you want to replace him in free agency, you know what you have the free agent money to get at left tackle? Jed Wills. That's what
yeah,
you have. So you're kind of just, it is what it is, because he's just in that class of tackle that's like, hey man, they could be all right, but they're probably going to frustrate you a little. And you combine that with Deshaun Watson, who I've always said this, even when he was in Houston, his biggest issue, because he takes so many sacks, like he takes like 60 plus 40 sacks every year. Even Josh Allen doesn't take that many sacks, or Pat Mahomes, other guys who play make. And part of that's because he just does things that are not helpful for your tackles at time, right?
yeah,
Like sometimes he gets ridiculously deep in his drops, and he kind of blows his tackle depth and makes it real easy to get him on an angle. Sometimes he just kind of gets flighty in the pocket to where he gets out of there way too early and guys aren't expecting it. They have to figure out something between the two of them to be able to survive there for the season, because that's the one thing I took away from week one, where I'm like, that can't continue. Like they gotta, Jed's got to be able to get beat in more predictable ways so Deshaun Watson can anticipate it, because it blew up like 3 or 4 passing plays that I thought could have been really successful in that game, because Jed kept getting beat or Deshaun wasn't anticipating he get beat like that. And at quarterback, if you can get beat in ways that are predictable, and again, why I think the DeJuan Jones thing not going to be as much of an issue, because how DeJuan's going to get beat, that's probably predictable, right? Like you're going to see him set bad, and you're like, all right, TJ's coming. Let me step up or get rid of this ball, and it won't be a big deal. How Jet gets beat, man, you can't guess it sometimes,
yeah.
and that's been the problem. I think Deshaun's going to have to talk to him and say, hey, if you're going to get beat, I need to feel pretty confident that you're getting beat like this. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think too with like fan bases expectations, I always find it interesting that you mentioned him being just kind of like an average player. I always find it interesting when average players like that end up being the most controversial, because you know 80% of the league, and this is something that I learned over time, but like 80% of the league is really like league average starters or like average
Mm-hmm.
players. You've got your you'll have your elite guys that are somewhere in that 10%, and then you've got your 10% like replacement players. Those are guys that are like rookies, finding their footing in the league, or guys that are maybe past their prime and aging out of the league, or but 80% of the league really is in somewhere in this like middle tier of just being acceptable, where they're going to be fine against most matchups as long as they're in the right system. But they're just not going to go out there and just dominate every single week. I think it's particularly troublesome when a guy like Wills is in that category and he's inconsistent because he's a top pick. Like I think
Yeah.
if Wills was a guy like Dan Moore, the Steelers have kind of rode this roller coaster for the last couple of years. If he was a guy like Dan Moore who was inconsistent, I think Wills is a better player than him. But just kind of rode that roller coaster. It's a little easier pill to swallow because you're like, well, Dan Moore is a 4th round pick. Like anything you get from that in terms of starting production is good.
It's like
That's not just completely anchoring or like torpedoing your offensive line, but
it's
with
like
Wills
the
being a top
Tremaine
pick, it
Edmonds
does.
thing. It's like, hey, you take Tremaine
Yeah.
Edmonds in the 3rd round. You're very
Yeah.
happy with that.
Right.
But you took him in the 1st round, so you're
Right.
always like, oh, you're getting the 5th-year option. You got to worry about these other things that comes with them. And
Yeah.
sometimes that, but even then in the 1st round, like I think people underestimate how hard it is to get a starter sometimes in the 1st round, because like usually like 40% of them picks, they never start. Like or start at a play at a starting level in the NFL in the 1st round. So it's like if you get a starter, you can't be upset because at least you didn't completely waste that pick.
Yeah.
But you're
Especially when
always
you're picking
focused
in the back 20s,
Yeah.
like the
But you're
Steelers were all the time.
Yeah, but you're always focused on the guy that went in that draft. That's like for the longest time, people could not appreciate David Njoku because TJ Watt went right after him, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, oh, we could have had that guy, but we have David, and David's really good. David's solid, really good pass block. I mean, really good run blocker. Really integral what the Browns want to do. And I guess that's the last thing I want to transition into is Nick Chubb, this run game versus a defensive line in a front 7 in Pittsburgh minus Cam Hayward, which I'm excited to see what happens there, because if you have to play Larry Ogunjobi more rundowns, like I've been in that world before. Larry Ogunjobi, former Brown, I kind of understand where his issues have always been, is the run game, even in Cincinnati. So how do you feel about that, given the success that McCaffrey had? And it's kind of tough for that defense to go, hey, you just dealt with McCaffrey, who's difficult to tackle because he's just slippery. Here's Nick Chubb, who's a bowling ball and more slippery than you would think.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Anytime the Browns come to town, you immediately hear Mike Tomlin say, like, it starts with Nick Chubb, and we kind of know what that's going to look like. And I think the Deshaun wrinkle is where we're trying to figure out, what's this offense going to look like with blending what Chubb does really well and what Deshaun wants to do and what Stefanski does well and all those things together. But I think that you look at some of the things that, Chubb, even like last week, like it seemed like they leaned into like a little bit more gun run, which I kind of anticipated a little bit, because Deshaun, he likes to be in the gun. But Chubb's always been a gifted runner, like not just under center, but, in the gun. Cleveland's also interesting to me because they don't just stick to zone or stick to gap. Like they run a lot of different stuff. They run, pin and pull. They'll get him on the edge. And Chubb's one of those guys too, where like he's good at everything. You can outside zone him. You can run him, duo. He can do everything. So he's really difficult. And then you mentioned kind of him being a bowling ball. That's something that always sticks out, just like the contact balance with him. The Steelers are going to miss Cam Hayward. There's no doubt. They got some good play last week, I thought, from like younger guys. Keanu Benton. I'm really excited about him. They're going to have to figure out, who's going to be able to pick up that slack. Ogunjobi, he's playing a little bit banged up, which he seems like he always is right now. But I thought he played okay last week. They're going to be relying on DeMarvin Leal, Isaiah Loudermilk, some other guys to kind of step in and play really good football. And I think, what it may end up being is the Steelers end up having to kind of roll a lot of, 7-8 man boxes up there, which is going to give Deshaun some deep shots. But I think that may be the world that the Steelers are willing to live in and say, like, all right, well, if Deshaun hits, two go balls, whatever, to Cooper, to Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, if he does that, then we'll live in that world. But we're not going to let Nick Chubb, or at least try not to let Nick Chubb go for, $150 and just control the clock, control the pace of the game flow.
How do you feel about the matchup if you do that, leaving Pat Peterson kind of in there with guys like Coop and Elijah Moore, pretty good route runners, kind of similar to Ayuk?
Yeah, Cooper's always been a guy in particular that I've respected just from a route running perspective. The Steelers, like I said, they don't have cornerbacks that you're like really willing to consistently, at least to where I don't feel consistently great about leaving them out there on an island. But you got to take away something, and that's the
Mm,
one thing, especially when you're going up against like dynamic players like Chubb. Kind of like what we talked about with McCaffrey last week. You got to take away something. You can't take away everything, but if you could take away something and just try to make them one dimensional, I think the Steelers' best chance to like just completely, really stop the Browns' offense would be to force Deshaun into some mistakes. He, like you mentioned, kind of some of the hero ball playmaking stuff that he is kind of prone to. Deshaun wants to play out of structure. Like that's what he wants to do.
hmm
He wants to hold on the ball. But we saw that in the regular season finale last season. They were able to kind of speed him up and get him into some of that hero ball stuff where you can sometimes occasionally force him into bad decisions and things like that. And you got playmakers at the back end like Minkah or whatever that can take advantage. So that would be probably the world that I would want to live in personally. But it's not always as easy. Chubb's been one of the statistically best runners too against like 7-8 man boxes. So it's not just like, oh, we'll just throw a bunch of guys up there because of how good Cleveland's front is. So it'd be a good matchup for sure.
Yeah, and I think the one adjustment Deshaun has to make, that coming back from a 700-day delay, is it's a too high league now, right? Like, some of that deep ball stuff that was there in 2019, 2020, it's just they're not willing to take those chances. They're willing to just kind of grind you out, wait you out, make you kind of take what's there. And that's what I was seeing when I watched him in tape was, sometimes Deshaun just needs to take it when it's there instead of trying to make something else happen, because he ends up having to come back to what was originally there much
Yeah.
later, to the point to where, like, he's not in motion anymore. You don't have the angle. You're just not going to get the same amount of production. So I think, he probably watched the same film. Like, they probably told him the same thing, where it's like, hey, you just got to hit it you just got to hit it in the pocket, man, because it's there. The stuff
Yeah.
was there against Cincinnati. It's just, he wanted to make more things happen. And I understand it's been since 2019 since he's had a good game that anybody's cared about. And he probably wants that again really bad. It's been itching. It's been almost it's like 3-4 years since that. So he's dying for a big 300-yard game. My big fear this week is that, hey, it's Monday Night Football. You see the Steelers defense has had some issues, especially, covering Coop, that he's going to try to take some chances that are unnecessary, turn the ball over, because I think ultimately the Steelers offense doesn't give you a great margin of error the Steelers offense for them doesn't give them a great margin of error in this game. You can't give them more opportunities,
Right.
more leeway than they need. This is a game where you kind of need to play conservative, right? Take what's there, run Nick Chubb, and then feel good about your defensive matchups and win that battle, and you'll probably win this game if you're the Cleveland Browns. But if you start to try to do too much, you start to try to throw this thing downfield, or you try to break their defense, and you're not successful, then you're making enough mistakes to where Pittsburgh can win this game. And that's why Pittsburgh doesn't go under 500. It's because Mike Tomlin understands that competence is valuable in the NFL, and competence will win you football games. Because how
Yeah.
many times has a team had an easy road to victory versus a Tomlin team starting like Duck Hodges, and they just don't take
Yeah.
it? And
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin's like, I'll take that road. It's real simple sometimes, where it's like, hey, just take the path that's in front of you. But it's some guy, like, that's one of the hardest things in the NFL, for people to just accept that path, take it, because it's not exciting sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too. Like we've been talking about with the Steelers, man, is like the Steelers. The thing that we need to see is like we need to see if they're capable of winning the shootout. And until we see it, they scored 7 points last week, so it wasn't even close. But until we see them go, win a game 30-28, or win a game 28-27, or score 30 points or something like that against a good defense. Until we see that, it's kind of difficult to believe it could happen. So to your point, if as long as Cleveland doesn't turn the ball over 3 times, how confident are you that the Steelers are going to be able to put up more than 21 points against that Browns defense? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
personally, if you're going to tell me that Deshaun will play clean football, and this is aside from what Chubb could or couldn't do against the Steelers front, if you're going to tell me like Deshaun's going to play clean football, Chubb will have even an average game, I think that probably that would favor the Browns, just because if you're not going to give the Steelers offense short fields, I don't know that we've seen enough from this unit to really believe that they can go up and down the field just yet.
Ha-
Until we see it, I don't know if you can be confident in that.
has a Matt Canada offense put up 30 points yet?
Nope, nope.
Wow.
Or well, no. They scored 30 against Cincinnati last season, but that
That
was
was an
like with a
overtime.
touchdown. It was with a touchdown at the buzzer that was like not relevant. They have not scored. They have not gained
Uh,
400 yards of offense with Canada though. Every other team in the NFL has done it multiple times in that span.
yeah, it's rough. It's rough. It's
It's
rough.
not great. It's not great. I'm so over it, man.
I
Because
saw
like,
some of the plays that they ran at the goal line. I was like, oh,
dog, they were running four
like,
verts. They were running four verts from the
I was
8.
like, this is stuff you call a timeout on when Madden makes you play it. Like, I'm like, what is going on here? Like,
I'm so ready to I'm so ready to close this book, because as the years have gone on, and like I've continually learned more and more about like just the schematic intricacies of the NFL and things of that nature. It's difficult to watch now that I understand more. It's difficult to watch Canada's offense and then turn on the tape. When I'm trying to preview a team like the Cleveland Browns, or trying to preview a Kyle Shanahan team, and I'm like, man, I don't even feel like I'm watching the same sport. Like this is just, it's very frustrating, and I'm really ready to close this chapter of my life with Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator of the
look,
Steelers.
I was there with Freddie Kitchens in 2019. It got so bad. Well, I had JT O'Sullivan from QB Film School on to talk about Baker's interceptions, because he threw like 12 of them in the first half of the season, and to see like what was the issue going on there. And he was just like, well, man, like Baker doesn't look good, but what the hell is Freddie Kitchens doing with this offense, man? He's
JT,
like, I'm not. When he says I'm not familiar with this technique, it's like, oh yeah, it's cooked.
Yeah, dude,
like your protections are terrible.
He despises Canada too. It is so funny, because like he very rarely does like Steelers related videos, but he did a couple last year, and like you said, there are ways that JT subtly and not so subtly says like, this sucks, like this scheme,
He's a
or
coach.
this,
You know what I mean? Like he says
route
it in coach
concept
speak
sucks.
sometimes. He's like, yeah, this ain't for me. You know
Did you
what I
watch?
mean?
I don't know, the people of the channel, y'all gotta go watch the Bears video he put out. It was an hour long, but how many times he's looking at this and he's like, "What the hell are we doing? What are we doing?" Just over and over again. It's
Yeah.
JT's funny. I just bought a second course of his to take. He's taught me just an absolute ton. He's awesome though.
Great channel there. But thank you for coming on, D. Appreciate you. It's gonna be an interesting game. Gotta wait till Monday. 2 Monday night games, and Monday Night Football been weird this year, man. It's been weird. So we'll see what happens. Maybe it's a thriller. Maybe it's not. Maybe Kenny gets that 400-yard game for you. We'll see. But thank you for coming on. Make sure you check him out at Steelers DB. He'll be tagged in the video down below, and he has some film breakdowns on his channel. Check him out. Great stuff there as well. But thank you for coming on. Everybody else, you have a great day. Have a good night.